Terrorism, I think, is best defined as an act that is meant to cause fear and panic. Terror, if you will. Hence why it's called terrorism. And the modern prototype of what terrorism is would have to be the attacks of September the 11th, 2001. Obviously for people from England, it might be the London bombings, whatever the case might be. But those would be kind of the definition of terrorism, regardless of who you think was behind them, who you think perpetrated them, who funded them, whatever the case might be. No matter who did it, whether you believe the official story, you believe something else, you believe it was an inside job, I think one thing we can all agree on is that it was a terrorist act. It was something designed to evoke fear, it was to scare people, to terrorize people, hence why it was called terrorism. Another example of this, as our media has made sure to point out to us time after time over the past several years, would have been the Benghazi embassy bombings. Killed several Americans, including the ambassador there. But again, something done to evoke fear, to scare people, what have you. And you look at what have been dubbed terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. And just in recent times, I'll stick to the 2009 Fort Hood shootings, where one soldier killed many others and wounded many others more. And while the government tried to sit there and classify it as a workplace shooting for their own purposes, it was something that most people, and most especially the news media, treated as a terrorist attack, and rightfully so. You look at the Boston Marathon bombings with the Tsarnaev brothers. They killed a few and injured hundreds more. That was designed to create fear, to scare people, to cause a panic, to terrorize citizens. That's a terrorist attack. Well, do you believe something else was at play, or you believe what has always been reported? Terrorist attack. It did what it was designed to do. And even when you look at the recent shooting at the Naval Recruiting Office, again, killed several people, designed to make you fearful, to make you afraid, to scare you, to terrorize you. I don't dispute the labels on any of those. They fit the definition. They were terrorist acts that were perpetrated. That's what they were. But something really stands out to me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that notices this, and maybe other people talk about this too or have talked about it, but I just felt like it was something that I needed to come on here and say. Because I look at some of these shootings and bombings, and they're classified as terrorist attacks from the very beginning, before you even get the evidence, before you even find out the motives. Especially once there is a perpetrator identified, they're terrorist attacks. And you'll be damned to sit there and convince anybody they're anything other than terrorist attacks, especially with the relentless 24/7, 365 news cycle that we have, where our state-run corporate-owned news media is trying to create sensationalistic headlines and they're trying to suck you in. Well, nothing is going to do that better than terrorism, and that's a sad reality. That is the truth of the matter. So I look at those. I look at 9/11, Benghazi, the Fort Hood shooting in 2009, Boston Marathon bombing. I look at the recent shooting at the Naval Recruiting Office. I say, yeah, those are all terrorist attacks. But something's amiss here, and something really doesn't add up. Because to me, if a man kills 12 and wounds 70 in an Aurora, Colorado movie theater, that's a terrorist attack. When a young man goes and kills 20 elementary age kids and 6 adults in a Newtown, Connecticut school, that to me is a terrorist attack. When a man goes into a Charleston, South Carolina church and kills 9 people, that to me is a terrorist attack. When a man recently goes into a Louisiana movie theater, kills 2 and wounds, I believe, like 7 or 8 more, again, random acts of terror, terrorism. They were terrorist acts. But when you look at how they are portrayed in the media, It's anything but that. And why is that? When it comes to John Holmes and that Aurora, Colorado shooting, we focus on guns and we focus on mental health. Adam Lanza in the Newtown shooting, it's mental health and it's guns. Dylan Roof killing 9 blacks in a Charleston, South Carolina church. It's about mental health and guns, not terrorism. When a 59-year-old drifter sits there and kills 2, wounds several others in the Louisiana movie theater, we talk about it just being a random act of gun violence and talk about his mental health and his mental state. And again, another referendum on guns and gun control. Why are none of these ever talked about in the news media as terrorist attacks? More people died at the hands of Adam Lanza or John Holmes or Dylan Roof than did in the Boston Marathon bombing. That's not to sit there and diminish what happened with the Boston Marathon bombing. That's not to sit there and try and minimize it in any way, shape, or form. And my whole point is not to sit there and say that those other things that I mentioned, 9/11, Benghazi, the first Fort Hood shooting, the Boston Marathon bombing, the Naval Recruiting Office shooting, that they're not terrorist attacks, because they were. But why isn't John Holmes a terrorist? Why wasn't Adam Lanza a terrorist? Why isn't Dylan Roof a terrorist? Why isn't this fuck in Louisiana a terrorist? Why isn't the guy that did the Fort Hood shootings in 2014 classified as a terrorist? Especially in the first 4 of these ones that I mentioned, newsflash news media. White shooters are terrorists too. Why is it every time, it seems like to me, in my opinion, that we see some white person sit there and commit some act of mass violence, we don't call it what it is, terrorism. We talk about mental health. We talk about their mental state at the time. We talk about their mental health history. We talk about guns and how they got access to guns and whether they bought guns or they stole guns or they got them legally or got them illegally. We talk about everything and anything except fucking terrorism. Why does the news media do this? As I stated, the dude in Aurora, Colorado killed a few more people than the Boston Marathon bombing did. Yet you almost never hear him talked about being a terrorist. It's all about mental health and mental state, and it's talking about gun control and this and that. And why is that? Because all of these other people, from Aurora, Colorado to Newtown, Connecticut, to Charleston, South Carolina, to Louisiana, all of these perpetrators are white. Period. Because what's distinguishing, what's so different in the way that they can be treated so differently and so pathetically, predictably differently by our state-run, corporate-owned news media? A white man, Dylan Roof, who professes his love for the good old Rhodesia and the stars and bars, goes shoots up 9 blacks in a historically black Charleston, South Carolina church. But we're talking about how he got his guns. We're talking about all these different things, except the fact, frankly, by a lot of the news media that he was a freaking racist, especially the news media on the right side of the fence, which is absolutely sickening. But most importantly of all, the one common thing that both elements of fair and balanced, the not fair and balanced Fox News and the not fair and balanced far left media seem to all be missing the point on. He's a fucking terrorist. And it's time we stop sitting there and sugarcoating it and talking about mental health to advance one type of agenda about universal background checks or mental health registries for gun ownership. It's about time we sit there and stop just talking about gun control, where one side gets all butthurt because they sit there and say, oh, you're going to take my gun. So that way, all that ends up happening is the gun manufacturers and the gun sellers make more money because the people that are afraid of losing their precious fucking guns go buy more fucking guns. And then the other side of the fence sits there and wants to talk about controlling damn guns, which has absolutely nothing to do with what happened with Adam Lanza as he took somebody else's guns. Everybody misses the fucking point. People get too caught up in their emotions to see past their own fucking selfish stupidity. And all the while, you allow your news media to sit there and pound this relentless propaganda cycle up your ass and down your fucking throats. They literally go ass to mouth on you. And you suck it up. You take it, you swallow it, and you want more. Zarnev's a terrorist, then what the fuck was Adam Lanza? Seriously. If the dude that committed the 2009 Fort Hood shooting is a terrorist because he was not white and he was a Muslim, then what the fuck was the dude in Aurora, Colorado? Or what was Dylan Roof in Charleston, South Carolina? You notice that though, people? Wake up and smell the roses. Every time it seems like, and sure, people are going to be assholes in the comment section and point out exceptions, and there are going to be exceptions to the rule. You'll talk about the Navy Yard shooting a couple of years ago, and it was committed by a black man, and you'll say, well, why wasn't he talked about as a terrorist in this? You know, you were talking about a civilian contractor doing that to a military installation, and they really couldn't tie him to Islam or tie him, I don't believe, to being a Muslim. As much as people wanted to, at the end of the day, it didn't fit the narrative. It didn't fit what certain entities and certain interests want to advance. You know, people can sit there and say that Muslims commit terrorist attacks. There are certain Muslims that do. Most definitely and absolutely. But in the grand scheme of things, if we are being completely and totally honest with ourselves, because obviously our government is not going to do it, and obviously our state-run, corporate-backed, and owned and funded news media most certainly is not going to be honest with us, especially when it comes to the United States, more terrorist acts are committed by white people than any other groups combined. And that's a fact. Most of these mass shootings we hear about, frankly, are perpetrated by whites. You know, I think back several years ago to the dude that went to the Amish school and shot 5 girls dead. We talked about guns and we talked about mental health. We did everything except call the guy what he was, a fucking terrorist, and treat him like a terrorist. Zarnev sits there and is a part of a bombing in Boston, and we're shutting down cities like we're a freaking military state. John Holmes does it, and we've got him pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, and we've got people debating whether or not he was mentally competent to stand trial or whether he was mentally fit enough to be able to be put away for the rest of his life or potentially fucking executed. I can't believe I would be the only one that can see this, and I hope that I'm not the only one that can see this. And this is not an instance of me being ashamed of being white. This is not an instance of me just trying to sit there and do this or do that. It's a simple fact of the matter is I want this shit to be equal across the board. I want it to be a level playing field in all aspects. And that includes the way that we cover things. When people are wounding 70 and killing 12 in a Colorado movie theater, that's terrorism. Similar to how Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris once shot up Columbine and killed about 20 students. We talked about mental health. We talked about guns. We talked about fucking video games and violence. We did everything except call it what it was. A freaking act of terror. And I wish more people would sit there and call out the news media on this unequal treatment. Why is Zarnev a freaking terrorist but Adam Lanza wasn't? Why is the dude that shot up Fort Hood in 2009 a terrorist according to the news media in a lot of ways, but Dylan Roof wasn't? White people are terrorists too, and these white shooters are terrorists just as much as any Muslim is. And frankly, if we're being perfectly and completely honest about it, in the sense of the United States borders, no race of people commits more terrorist acts than whites. Frankly, more than all others put together combined. Who does the majority of the school shootings? Who does the majority of the public shootings? It's not blacks, it's not Muslims, it's not Middle Easterns. It's freaking white people. News media. White shooters are terrorists too. And it's time we start treating them like it.